From the Mercy One studio.
Welcome, folks, to The Uncommon Good with Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr. Every week, diving deep into the truth of Catholic social teaching and restoring all things in Christ.
The Uncommon Good is on the air. I'm Bo Bonner.
I'm Dr. Bud Marr.
We are coming to you live from these United States of America. I am out here in Des Moines, Iowa, where I'm the Director of Mission and Ministry at Mercy College of Health Sciences and the Director of the Zeta Institute for Foundation and Ethics and Leadership. You can find us at mchs.edu and zetainstitute.com. Bud is out in Pittsburgh, and let me tell you, people, I saw it with me own eyes, so it does exist. Bud, tell people what you do out in the land of bridges and tunnels.
I'm here at the National Institute for Newman Studies, or you can just say NINS, and we're all things Newman, help people to know about his life and work, and you can find us at newmanstudies.org.
And, folks, if you get to make it, I made my first inaugural trip to Pittsburgh. I think on this radio show, we doomed ourselves because we very publicly said we were taking the whole family, and then, of course, because demons also listen to our show, Bud, they infected your children with illness. And so then we decided that it was best not to take our little baby who's only 8 months old. So only I got to go have the Pittsburgh experience. But let me tell you, you guys, of course, like always, are wonderful hosts. And Pittsburgh's a pretty neat place. There's not as many French fries as I suspected, but there were plenty of French fries and plenty of good times. It's a neat little place that you guys got out there.
Yeah, we think of French fries like Jim Gaffigan thinks of bacon bits. You can really spice up anything with a little potato action, bada bing, bada
French
potato.
fries. Right.
So, yeah, you didn't seem to be complaining.
No, the Primati brothers that you talked about as being a sort of staple of Pittsburgh, let me tell you, folks, that's the real deal. That is some wonderful, wonderful coleslaw. I mean, the meat was all good, but I really like how they do, was it coleslaw or sauerkraut? Whatever it is, it's fantastic.
Yeah. No, I know we need to get to our underwriter, but Primati Brothers, some Pittsburghians kind of act like, it's not a big deal because, they're so used to it or whatnot, but I think it's pretty good. And the inspiration, I don't know if they told you this, was when guys were going off to the steel mill.
Right.
They needed to be full for the entire day. So they said, we're not just going to do lunch meat on French bread. We're going to throw in some coleslaw and French fries.
Now, of course, what they don't know is I was still hungry afterwards. But I am not I'm not a good person to make those sort of judgments off of. However, we were talking about our underwriters. Bud, you really need to start working that Pittsburgh angle. I ran into a lot of people who have actually heard the show out in Pittsburgh, and maybe if we get the Primati Brothers seal, maybe we have a real chance to spread out in Steelerland.
Well, yeah, and I was telling you this while you were in town. I just want to let our listeners know it's not that it's because I haven't made a pitch. I have reached out to the local Catholic radio station here. How do I say this delicately? We are kind of the ethos of our show runs a little bit sideways to the ethos of the radio station.
What Bud's saying is we're very loud, and they are not.
They're very contemplative. It's really kind of a unique radio brand, but I think they're pulling it off. And I need to circle back with sandwiches in hand.
That's right. If you have the sandwiches in hand. No, folks, just to make a pitch, like maybe we can get the city of Pittsburgh to underwrite the show, because I got to say, it's very beautiful out there. So many wonderful trees and hills, very beautiful old architecture. Even the weird buildings like the Cathedral to Learning and Heinz Chapel, which don't make sense, are very awesome to look at. The only thing with Pittsburgh that really freaked me out, Bud, is actually nothing to do with your family at all. It's the fact that, like, 2/3 of Pittsburgh's airport is like a weird ghost town, and when you're walking around for an hour and a half, you feel like you're in a weird movie.
Yeah, it throws the kids off a bit, because when we land home from trips, they think, like, we're there, and you have to pass through the ghost town and then ride the train.
Right. Yep.
They don't complain about the train, but you have to ride the train.
There is a dinosaur, too, so that's pretty cool. As always, brought to you by Mercy College of Health Sciences. Mercy College of Health Sciences, the place you want to go if you want to get a fast-track career into health sciences to help people, mchs.edu. We're well past the sort of beginning of all this. I think midterm grades, I think I just saw were due. So people are in the thick of things, and you can be in the thick of things too and helping people. mchs.edu, especially getting ready to start in spring, but especially popular is if you have work that you've already done and you want to sort of shift careers. We have the accelerated nursing program, all things that you can go look at mchs.edu.
Yeah, I may or may not have dropped the ball with midterm grades. I took a trip to Europe and then organized that conference, and so I got an email from the registrar, but she was very patient with me.
Very patient and kind.
I'm still going to be able to teach there in the spring.
That's really good to hear. So, Bud, how about we introduce the special guest that we have on the show today?
So our guest this morning, she's well known among many who keep up on current events and things. She's a columnist for the National Review Online, Catherine Jean Lopez. I love the fact that her nickname is Kalo.
Yeah.
A wordplay based on J-Lo. Her employees call her this. So you know she has a good sense of humor. But Catherine Lopez, she's written extensively for the National Review, but she's recently published a book called A Year with the Mystics, Visionary Wisdom for Daily Living. And if you're looking to grow in your prayer life, I think, especially in 2020, this would be a great place to start. Each day has a really nice saying from the mystic, and then she kind of helps guide the reader through prayers of reflection based on that.
So like always, we're going to talk about the book, but then try to point out where it has a sort of connection with the common good. I think it'll be easy to do. You'll really want to stick around with this one. This is Bo Bonner, Bud Marr coming to you live on this Wednesday. Stick around. We'll be back right after this. Back with the Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr coming to you this Wednesday. We're working on getting our show guests. We're having a little bit of technical difficulties, but Bud, while we're doing that, I know you had an announcement that you wanted to make.
Well, I have two announcements I want to make, but I'll start with the one I had in mind. The first is we did have a winner for the book giveaway last week. I had pulled together that collection of Newman quotes, and the first person to tweet St. John Henry Newman, pray for us, got the book. So that was Julie Sokolowski. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. It's at #Julie_Soko. So we'll be direct messaging her this morning. It was funny, Bo, when I was looking at the winners, there was a #Uncommon Good tweet from the NBA player Kyle Korver.
What?
And I was like, holy cow. But it was, I think, before the show was even on the air.
Oh.
And there was some article about the uncommon good. It meant, like, doing good where you least expected it.
Oh, darn it. Well,
yeah.
we were almost there.
My second announcement, and this is a little bit embarrassing, but I'm going to take the fall.
Oh.
I'm looking at past emails, and Catherine is slated for November 6th.
Jimmy, did you hear that? She's slated for next week.
But
this has been this kind of show today.
I don't know what it is. Yeah, you mentioned in the
So that was his second announcement, that he's actually calling her on the wrong week?
Yeah. It's an uncommon good first.
Trick or treat.
We're still in October, right?
Yeah, it's October.
Okay. Yeah. But Bo, this week we do celebrate All Saints Day,
yeah.
All Souls Day, and these holidays back to back, of course, for Catholics, holy days, I should say.
Yeah.
Very important. The first, of course, last week we spent a great deal talking about St. John Henry Newman.
Right.
And I think with the saints, it's always good to circle back to a theology of sainthood. Because for myself, I can kind of operate with like the trading cards mentality, where it's like, I love St. John Henry Newman, I love St. Teresa of Avila.
Right.
And that's fine and good. I think there is a certain sense where like our hearts should be moved by the example of the saints. But in reading Catherine's book and preparing for that conversation next week, there's also a sense where we can't lose sight of the fact that we're all called to sainthood. So if we ever present the saints as like a bar that's only for certain kinds of people, we're kind of missing the vocation that God's prepared for us.
No, that's right. First of all, I want to say very clearly online, I'm not laughing at Bud. I'm laughing with Bud.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No.
I just hope I'm not fired.
No, you're not
Is Tony
fired.
listening to the show?
No, this is already been one of my favorite shows. You know what we need to do, Bud, that we haven't done for a while? Do you remember that we had great moments?
That's right.
We had great moments in Uncommon Good history, and so and we had like a compilation show for when you moved to Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
Yeah, we really do. We need to like make another compilation show, and I think the sort of like the two announcements was brilliant. But you were made for radio. That is such an awesome on-air. You should do improv. I know I shouldn't take airtime to say this, but I am very impressed with how you pulled that off. That was one of the smoothest things I've ever been a part of. We're all in awe here in the studio. I just have to stop and say, I want to salute you. That was awesome.
I didn't know exactly how to broach the topic that I had flip-flop dates.
No, that's okay.
So I thought, like, I'll lead with the book giveaway, and then people are like, "Oh, that guy seems like a nice guy. He gives away books."
It's like the parable, right, where it's like the unjust the steward that's getting ready to be fired, so he goes and he reckons accounts with everyone. So you're like, if I give a book, I like it.
Does
Bud.
Anyone in the studio need a book?
Yeah,
Copy.
if you guys get copies of Bud's book, will he still have a job next week? The answer is yes, Bud. Your job is safe with us.
Did we leave a voicemail with Catherine?
No, we didn't.
Okay.
I just think she's like, where's 515? Any rate, we'll deal with it later. So I think, Bud, you're right. We have an easy topic to talk about. So, Jimmy, you were asking, listen, obviously we're coming up on the saints, and we're talking about Halloween. Everybody's been talking about that with the jokes, but then also we have All Saints and All Souls, and the idea about what does it mean to be a saint, what does it mean for us to aspire to be saints, and then what does it mean for us to do things like pray for the dead. So like you said, a wonderful way to put this, the saints are not, we shouldn't have a trading card mentality, and I was just, that really stuck in my mind. You can imagine turning the card over and it's all like, but it wouldn't be batting average, right? It would be more like, now to sort of extend your dorky example, it would be like an RPG or like some sort of game where it's like, oh, they have a 10 in prayer but a 5 in patience or something like this.
Yeah.
And you can imagine making these cards and like really probably straight up offending some people. But the idea, right, is that we're not looking at them in just this sort of way about, collect them all, collect all the saints. And I think one of the ways you were pointing this out, and it makes sense, right, with how much we've been talking about John Henry Newman. If people want to be mad about us talking about John Henry Newman, we're just going to throw out the idea that it's not every year that you get to be part of the canonization of someone who means so much, obviously, for you, but me as well. But these saints kind of sneak into your lives, and I think that starts to be the first question we have to ask, Bud, as we're considering the end of the year here, October into November. Do people really act like the saints are alive and have an influence in what we do, and do we actually have relationships with them? Because otherwise, it's like you said, they're just sort of moral exemplars up on a poster.
Yeah, and I'm sensitive to these concerns because I have so many evangelical friends and relatives, and if you haven't spoken as much to that kind of Christian, they do, even when they're very like sensitive and charitable about the whole thing, they feel like Catholics are just too fixated on the saints, and part of it is that they have this sense that like the kind of honor that we would give to the saints would detract from the glory of God. Even in Catholic circles, you'll sometimes encounter this. So I think of someone like Dorothy Day. When someone suggested to her that she might be a saint, she said, don't call me a saint. I don't want to be dismissed so easily.
Right.
And what she meant by that is she's like, this life that I'm aspiring to live, this life of simplicity and service to the poor, this is just what Jesus taught. So this is what we should be about. But I think even Dorothy Day, who I greatly admire, and I see what she's concerned about, I think that quote can mislead because the saints are not these sort of like demiurges who are set apart from the rest of human existence. They actually, God's grace becomes so real and so tangible in their lives that they show to us what human nature is actually supposed to attain to. So when we see the saints, as with Christ, we see what humans are actually called to be, not something that's sort of like ethereal or otherworldly.
Yes, I think that's what starts to be interesting is if we believe that the saints are alive, what you start to see in anyone's life who tries to take this seriously is, as converts, this kind of it comes up pretty easily. You go, oh, well, I like Thomas Aquinas. That's who I liked, and I'm going to make him my confirmation saint name. And yeah, and obviously Thomas Aquinas probably already was intervening in my life. I didn't grow up in rural Oklahoma reading the Summa with my friends who were eating, smoked bologna and talking about NASCAR. That didn't happen. So already he probably was like figuring out a way to sort of, whittle his way into my life. However, there's still an idea about like, oh, well, I'm going to like certain saints and then I'm going to, that's who I'm going to like read up on and they'll be mine. And like you said, it's like trading cards and collect them all.
Yeah.
And but what you start to realize is if you take this idea that the saints are alive, certain saints that you don't even really think of really start to butt their way into your life and show up all over the place in weird ways. I know with me, like Joan of Arc, who we've sort of dedicated the show to, but then also like St. Joseph, and there's others, even Newman in many ways, were not people that I sought out to say, oh, I'm going to be experts on these people, or like I like them beforehand. Gertrude the Great is certainly one like this for me, where they just kept showing up. And, when you're doing theology or, when you do sort of the sort of work we do, but you run across saints all the time. So it's not just a matter of, oh, by accident I read some of these people. It started to be interesting about how much, like churches named after these people kept showing up in random places at random times, or books that I myself did not get but other people handed to me. You start to see that the saints want to still be active and intervene in what we're doing. And so if that's the case, it's not just that they're moral exemplars, although they obviously are. And you think about John Henry Newman, again, we talked about this at the NINS conference that you were at. He makes the point that the saints are a beacon and that, in the realm of darkness where we don't have a clear way about where we go, we have the saints to look to. But it's very much the opposite way as well. Saints get interested in people's lives and they sort of knock down barriers and get into the muck of everyday life and decide whether we like it or not, that they're going to be our big brothers and sisters. And in that way, they seem very much like big brothers and sisters, that they're like, you might not want me to be involved in your life right now, but I'm going to give you a spiritual noogie and try to set you on the right direction.
Yeah, some of this theology came up when during Jesus' earthly ministry about, questions about the resurrection and things. And a phrase that our Lord used that always stood out to me was, God is not the God of the dead, but of the living. And sometimes at Mass we can recite the Creed and talk about the communion of saints, or we can read the book of Revelation and read about the saints whose prayers are constantly ascending before the throne of God in heaven, and those just become kind of rote phrases or ways of talking. But if we take seriously our faith, the saints are more alive than we are. I mean,
right.
They're in the presence of God, and they have a kind of perspective about the world that we won't fully have until we see God in glory. So I look at this, I love the way you put it, Bo, about like a big brother in our life. For myself, I've looked back at my previous history, and funny enough, in Omaha, I grew up in the parish of St. Philip Neri.
Right.
The parish that I lived in was St. Philip's Parish. And now my own study, my scholarship, my writing is dedicated to the thought of John Henry Newman, who was inspired by St. Philip's reforming example in 16th century Italy. So I can't help but feel like St. Philip was praying for me from my very earliest days. And to some, listening in, that might sound kind of crazy. But again, if we take seriously the teachings of our faith, why would, St. Philip be removed from what God wants to do in my life?
And, I mean, it starts to be a really interesting sort of, trifecta here at the end, and especially when you think about it in terms of the old calendar. I don't want to get into big debates about old calendar, new calendar. For the new calendar, so since 1970, the Feast of Christ the King is always the last Sunday before Advent, and it makes sense, right? So like the very last celebration is celebrating Christ the King, and really makes the sort of really makes the sort of case about the eschatological kingship, right? So like here at the end of time, Christ at the end will be king. But before 1970, and whenever they instituted the Feast of Christ the King, and it hasn't been too terribly long, I'm not going to act like it's the most ancient of feasts. A lot of celebration of Christ the King actually just was threaded throughout the year. But when they made the Feast of Christ the King, it was the last Sunday in October. And so people go, why the last Sunday in October? Well, precisely because you start to have this connection between Christ being crowned King of heaven and earth at the end of time, and then all saints and all souls. So Christ the King needs a kingly court of friends, as it were, like Christ needs his knights of the round table of his own, and that's his saints, and his choir, his confidants, his host, his army, the various ways that you speak about this. So we celebrate Christ the King, like I said, in the old calendar. Last Sunday, October, invariably you get November 1st, that's All Saints, and so that's the Church Victorious. But then you have the Church Militant, right? And you hear this word and think of it in terms of military and stuff like this. I think this is a trick of how English understandings have changed. But the idea is the saints are zealous to bring more of us who are on earth into that great host, that great army of the Lord. And all souls is about how do we get souls, especially those who have died, into that great army of the saints, into the retinue of Christ the King, so that Christ can be all in all and that he can lead his people, and like I said, have the great feast of heaven with them. So when you start to think about those three feasts together, and I don't think the fact that we sort of switched and now Christ the King is at the last Sunday, it still almost invariably happens in November, and you start to see, right, that, because December is taken up with Advent and preparation, November in many ways is the last month of the liturgical year. And so as we go into that time, we start to think, what does it mean to have our final end, not only to die, which of course Memento Mori, the Day of the Dead. Other cultures do a lot better job of understanding October 31st and November 1st as the Day of the Dead. But even in ours, when we think about the fact that we must die, the four last things, but it's not morbid because we think about what does it mean to belong to that great host of the saints, to be subjects to Christ the King, and that when we in our turn get the chance, are we going to be zealous for other souls, to try to bring them to the glory of heaven, and to help them through the time of purgation and purgatory.
Yeah, and I think about this. This is kind of a dead horse that I tend to beat, but I do think there's something to be said for the fact that the Catholic faith answers to the deepest needs of the human heart because it comes from God. And insofar as Catholics kind of drop the ball with this rich treasure that's been passed down to us, other things tend to fill that vacuum. And so I don't want to get hokey about this. Like, I don't, on October 31st, when so many around us celebrate Halloween, I don't think the best approach is necessarily to hand someone a pamphlet when they come to your door or something like that.
Maybe if it was a pamphlet made of candy.
Yeah, that's right.
They can read it, then eat it. Yeah.
If you tape a king-size, Snickers bar to it, they'll probably take it gladly.
Right.
But I don't know what it's like in your neck of the woods, Bo. Here in Pittsburgh, in our neighborhood at least, Halloween has become a huge deal. And I reposted an article from The Onion yesterday about the lone house in the neighborhood without any direct decorations is the most creepy.
Right.
Because that's me and Rachel's. But I do think I do think you see this in our culture that this time of year, weirdly enough, so many people's mind turns to spiritual things and to our relation to the dead and how we sort of commemorate that sort of thing. And so as Catholics, we've kind of joked about this on the show before, but we should embrace the sort of weird parts of our faith because I think, requiem masses and prayers for the dead and visiting cemeteries, strangely enough, I feel like for young people, a lot of that really resonates.
But all I have to say, living in Des Moines, is what is this Halloween you speak of? Because they have Beggar's Night and it's
yeah, you
tonight.
guys are set to go.
And we were literally talking about this in Des Moines. Actually, if it's true, it's even spookier. They supposedly have Beggars Night because they're worried about kids getting ran over on Halloween, which seems to be the excuse for a lot of stuff that happens in Des Moines, why there are no ice cream trucks. What was the other one we came up with? Why the state fair, they don't throw candy at the parade. So evidently we need to have some like very focused lessons about what children should do around cars around here. But the point being is, no, even with Beggars Night, and evidently this is a sort of tradition that happens in other places as well. I think you're exactly right. This is probably the most people think about death, especially when we have movies like Coco being popular enough, and certainly the sort of Day of the Dead, Memento Mori. You start to see that like spreading in our culture and people talking about it. You have the decorated skulls and things like this, and it does seem ripe for the occasion to talk about why have people always wanted to do this. People are it's spooky and we like being scared, but I do think there's a sort of deeper human longing. We who put death on the periphery of so much, really asking for the occasion to get to bring it out, so to speak. And talk about it, a people who believe we can mostly overcome death through natural means, or at least avoid it and its pain. I think you're right. I think this starts to be the rare occasion where we can talk about something very honestly. This is The Uncommon Good. We're coming up on the break. Make sure to stick around. Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr. We're going to be talking a bit more about All Saints, All Souls, and the communion we have with the dead and what that has to do with the common good. We'll be doing that right after these messages, so stick around. This is The Uncommon Good. We'll be back right after this. Back with The Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr coming to you live from all sorts of places in the United States. Me over in Iowa, Bud in Pittsburgh on a beautiful Wednesday, talking to you about All Souls, All Saints, and our communion with the dead.
Oh, what day is it? I think I have a doctor's appointment. You're going to have to handle
the show, Bo. I'm sorry, but I have to call the president right now. So, real quick, just so we can announce it again, we only have one announcement this time. Can you repeat the winner just in case they didn't hear?
The winner of the book giveaway is Kyle Korver, who in 2013 published something about the uncommon good. No, it's Julie Sokolowski. Julie Soko.
Well, I want to thank everybody who did what we asked. How many people did we end up, other than like pro NBA athletes, or we got some other people who did it too? They just weren't quite fast enough on the trigger.
Yeah, I'm kind of an old man and trying to figure out the old Twitter to find out which of these all applied to our show. There was a Blake Riffle who posted the same prayer that we asked just a few minutes after Julie. So I'm going to have to ask Pauline Books if he might get one as well.
Oh, yeah, fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, again, we want to thank everybody who was listening and did their job throwing out some love for Iowa Catholic Radio, for our show, for John Henry Newman and the book. So thank you all exceedingly. So, Bud, talking about All Saints, All Souls, one thing that we always try to do, of course, is relate what we're talking about back to the idea of the common good itself. And, one thing that I think is important that maybe will bring light to what we mean by the reality of the saints is, of course, the dead have a common good too, and we share a common good with the dead. So the common good does not end when your life ends, and it is also not the case that the common good is not shared between those living now and those on the other side of the veil. Now, that might be a weird way to think about it, but before I go into the yarn I have planned, what do you make of that statement, right, that we share a common good with the dead?
Well, as Catholics, it's so important that we have a concrete relation both to our past and to our future. And so often in these United States in the year 2019, what's on our minds and the way that we organize our lives is completely what's pressing. And so it's cliche, but we live for today. Whereas a proper relation to the dead, both the saints and the holy souls in purgatory, really it roots us in realities that existed before our time and will exist after our time here on earth. So we have to keep coming back to that. Like if we live only for the moment, we're living like pagans, and we're not seeing reality through the lens that God would want us to see it.
No, that's absolutely correct. And you start to think about what does it mean to share a good. So there's ways in which this can sound economic, but that's precisely some of the ways in which we deal with each other, right? Like when we talk about the most common good, the most shared, it's something that cannot be divided out or anything like this. It's something that we all have to share together. So when we talk about communion, for instance, not one individual person has communion, or you have some communion and I have part of it, or we have our own separate communions. It's either there's communion or there's not. It's one or nothing. So there's that part. However, there's also the idea that there's an exchange, right? When we share a common good, I give and I take, right? And it's not necessarily in piecemeal, but that's what we start to do when we talk about everything from following road signs to, prayers for the nation, to being a willing citizen. There's this idea in the common good that we, not in equal measure nor equal parts, but of what I'm capable of doing, I give to the common good, and then I receive back other things as well. And so even with our relationship to the dead, we start to see this, right? So we give the dead our prayers. We pray for the holy souls in purgatory. We give alms. We make sacrifices for the hope and the sake that we can share those those works. Remember, of course, because for Catholics, it's not that good works save you and get you into heaven, but that it's precisely the good work and merits that we do that habituate ourselves to the good so that we can enjoy heaven. Literally, purgatory is the preparation in order to be able to love heaven like we should. And so, obviously, it makes sense that one of the ways that we learn to be humble so that we can enjoy the fruits of heaven is that we learn to be beggars and ask for the prayers of those who are still alive. But so we are able to provide that while we still have time in this life. We do good works, we give alms, we pray, and we ask the Lord to count those merits towards the dead who are in purgatory so that they can make it to heaven. Well, then you go, what's the exchange? What do the dead give us? Well, most of the time, right, we think about those most closely aligned to us. It's the dead that gave us the very life that allows us to be here. If we think about our ancestors, if it was not for the fact that mommies and daddies loved each other very much and made an order with Mr. Stork, as it were, through repeated generations, we would not be here. But of course, things like our language, our religion itself, culture and its many entities, none of that exists except that the dead lend it to us, put it on loan for a future generation to receive. And then also what Chesterton calls the democracy of the dead, that the dead always outnumber us and that their voice is real and continues to have a presence and a say, that it's not just the wisdom of the day, but accumulated wisdom that humans have made throughout time. Every great scientist says that they are standing on the shoulder of giants to make the observations that they do, and we have that as well. So when you think about the common good that we have with the dead, certainly communion itself is a unitive good that we can't have. It is a social justice. It's something we share together or none of us have it. So we have that with the church militant, the church in purgatory, and the church triumphant with the saints. But also there is a sort of distributive element where we share in the different graces and strengths and weaknesses that God has distributed among the dead and the weak, the saints and those in life. But in even a communicative sense, right? We provide the prayers that help the dead on their journey through purgatory, and they provide us with the culture we have, the language we have, their continued prayers when they get to heaven, and then also just the sort of life itself that we have.
Yeah, growing up, I was told over and over that salvation is a gift, and if you present anything about humans contributing to this or meriting it, it takes away from the fact that God gives this to us freely. And becoming Catholic, I think this idea of salvation as a gift was even driven home to me more profoundly. So, Bo, you think about the way that we know about God today, the devotional practices that we have, the prayers that have been passed on to us, you and I didn't create those or write those.
Correct.
I sound a little bit like President Obama.
Right.
You didn't write those prayers.
All
and
true.
So, yeah, my baptism, the faith that I've received, it was in existence when I came into the world. And building on that idea and connecting it to the theme of the show, if we try to go about this whole endeavor as Lone Rangers,
Right.
how prideful is that? We have the saints to assist us, and God and His inscrutable providence has said, God doesn't just kind of, so to speak, like wave a wand over us and change us willy-nilly. We really do undergo the process of change completely as a result of God's grace. And there would be something completely prideful to say, like, I'm going to forge ahead on this path by myself, rather than relying constantly not only on those around us, our good friends and our relatives that we know now, but on the saints in heaven who their very existence is a life of prayer before the throne of God.
And I think that when we start to talk about all of these things, it's like you said, none of this existed beforehand. We received this. Becoming Catholic has helped people who grew up outside of that understand this. There is still a way that purgatory, the saints, all souls, all saints, merits, meritorious actions, things that have indulgences, all of those things can still sound like consumerist transactions. It's what I choose to do. It's what I like to do. There's the individual way that this can all be sort of meted out, and our culture is pretty good at making even highly communal activities seem like individual choices. But here at the end of the liturgical season, preparing us for Advent, waiting for the coming of Jesus Christ, I think all of these celebrations do a very good job of making us realize the absolute communal nature of what's going on with our faith, and that so communal that you can't even limit the communal view of what you're talking about with those who are around you. You have to think in a, people will say global perspective, although they usually mean a pretty big abstraction there. But literally this bond exists beyond the grave, and that we have a society, we have a world, we have a reality flush with relationships. It's not sort of, us humans standing boldly on a barren rock, hurtling through empty space, and then God somewhere out there after the abyss. Not only do we have the myriad dead, some sanctified, some being purgated, some in hell, that surround us, the great cloud of witnesses that Paul talks about. But even the angels, which we really got done celebrating, we have the Feast of the Angels that happened earlier in October, that we start to realize that the reality is chock full of relationships, that there really is no, so to speak, empty space, and I'm being metaphoric, of course, between us and God, because even creation itself is sort of its own extension between God and man, so that in a world where people continually feel lonely and alone, it's our role to look back at our ancestors and learn from them this idea that actually we're never alone. And as the psalm says, we could go to the underworld, we could go to the top of the sky, we could go to the bottom of the sea, and God will be there, and that God has extended this great cloud of witnesses and beings and angels to accompany us wherever we go.
Yeah, and to put kind of flesh on these bones, I would encourage us and our listeners to really take seriously what this will mean for how we organize our lives. Rachel and I have thought about this in our own household. If you flip through, and I'm going to make a fool of myself, but what's like a house-type store in America?
A house store?
William and Sonoma.
Yeah, that sounds right. I've never been, but yes, sure.
Where's the place where JT worked? I'm drawing a blank.
Oh, not Bed Bath & Beyond. Something
that might have been it.
No.
Okay.
We're calling it. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Say you go to Target.
Yeah.
You get a kind of vision of what your house should look like. You're flipping through the catalogs or whatnot, and this is sort of what you want to project to your neighbors. As Catholics, even what we put up in our house really matters. And so I don't say I've done this perfectly, but me and Rachel we've said to ourselves, so we want our kids for their vision to be on heaven.
Right.
And for them to be reminded of these kind of perennial spiritual truths, these spiritual realities. And so even as we decorate our home, we're not averse to having images of dear family members. Now, when we do put those up, a great place for them is like the hearth or the mantle, where even how we organize our home, it can remind us to pray for our loved ones who have passed on. But certainly images of the saints, so that your house becomes sort of a domestic church, where in the daily practice of life, our children are surrounded by reminders of the saints' intercession.
Yeah, that's something too. I mean, I think we come up with this this point multiple times on our show, but when anybody, it seems to me that you have to sort of take a butterfly pinned on a board sort of take to get really like, oh, this idea about asking for the intercession of saints, or like praying for dead loved ones, Pasha, because when I actually talk to people and think about my life before I ever imagined it was possible to even become Catholic, what did everybody talk about? That grandma's with us. I think granddad had something behind that. My grandma dies, and there's three geese that they make a honking noise in a certain way, and that used to be what grandma did to call like my dad and his sisters back to dinner. People just are rife with this idea that the dead don't stop being with us in some way, and even if they like go into the mode of, they're in our hearts or things like this, there's still this seed that the dead aren't quite gone forever. It's only the sort of most academic forcing themselves, it seems to me, that they'll go like, they're dead, and literally we don't even need to talk about them. So that was something that you said, this is a common longing of the human heart, but to be able to articulate it. And I think that that's what people miss. They might say, oh, well, we kind of have that too. But you go, no, how do we articulate that to talk about it being not only a little part of our faith, but very intertwined in our faith, to say, how do we keep on loving people past the grave if we believe in the one who was raised after 3 days?
You and I taught bioethics together at Mercy, and there are all sorts of ways that the medical field is running fast at pace, and we feel like away from Catholic convictions about the human person. And sometimes talking to the students, they would say, there are these kind of experimental things going on, and I feel uncomfortable about them, but I don't know exactly how to resist them. And I would say a public form of witness for Catholics can be a proper respect or reverence for the dead, so that we have these gut instincts. Even my oldest children, when they walk through a seminary now, they kind of instinctively have learned, or they've watched other people notice, that you don't just like trounce all over.
You said cemetery, right? It sounded like you said seminary.
In some cases.
Yeah.
No, yeah, cemetery, I'm sorry.
No problem.
Yeah. So, and, we use the phrase like, don't speak ill of the dead.
Right.
And some of those things just seem like it's difficult to even tease out how they arose. But if we don't, I think it's really important to kind of keep those habits in place, because then you meet people like, again, researchers with a very utilitarian mentality who say, well, once a human being dies, you can do pretty much whatever you want with their body, or we can even intervene to try to harvest their organs. Maybe there's all sorts of debates about when a person is actually dead.
Yes.
And I think those are safeguards, the traditional practices are safeguards to say there's something important about the body, especially since we affirm the resurrection of the body, and that's one way we can kind of keep that sense alive in our culture.
No, I agree. When we've used this article multiple times, someone that we had on the show. So Jody Bottom had an article called Death in Politics, where he starts to bring this up about how you keep seeing this in multiple cultures, this, if not absolute uniformity about what you do with the dead, or even what we would call respecting this dead, the dead, the idea about the centrality of what we do with the dead animating the various things that we talk about. And increasingly in the modern world, people, I think they're making a bold statement by saying, well, don't worry about what you do with me. And this is not to denigrate people who've had to have various loved ones cremated for various reasons. Obviously, it comes up. I understand this very much. But the idea that, let's do whatever we can in the cheapest way possible, or what's the most convenient, or I don't want to be a burden, all of that says something very particular about what we think human life and human society is about. And I think that's why it's important for us to say, no, we are going to be the people willingly burdened by the dead and what we do with the dead because we believe in the resurrection. It's not actually morbidity or being obsessed with death. It's realizing that, as St. Francis Assisi says, as weird as it sounds, that even death is a gift, or like our brother, that God has taken the ultimate thing that should be our enemy and what we should be worried about and has made it something that's possible to be transformative into grace. And so we ourselves will show that through, whenever possible, showing the greatest amount of care and deference to even the body of the dead, who, as we know, like a corpse is not the human person themselves, because body and soul. So we're not, sort of casting this person to say, like, they're done now that their body is done, but that we show reverence because the body was the temple of a soul that itself was the temple of the Holy Spirit. And that's where we get the idea of relics. That's where we get some of the creepy, weirdness of the Catholic faith that people still intrigues them today. But I think, to your point, Bud, it really does ground us in this idea that we believe in a common good that spans past the time we happen to be alive on this earth.
Well, I feel bad about giving our listeners multiple homework assignments, but besides decorating your home,
right?
There's also a handy little book called the Handbook of Indulgences. And for me, just getting deeper into the Church's theology of indulgences, if anything else, it's helped to discipline and organize my prayer life. And so during the month of November, there's special indulgences for visiting cemeteries and for visiting a church on All Souls Day, etc. So that's another thing to think about. Especially since,
at least here in Des Moines, we've had snow, and then we're going to have multiple chances for early snow. So maybe a very peaceful, picturesque, snow on gravestones, praying for the dead. I think that's something that's absolutely very Catholic and cultural forming. And hopefully everybody listening gets a chance to go participate in that great common good we share with the dead of trying to help each other get home to heaven. Bud, it's been fantastic. Again, one of the greatest shift moves on live radio I've ever heard. I want to tip my hat to you. That was one of the more amazing improv moments that I've ever been a part of, and I tip my hat to you. So thank you for your radio prowess. This is The Uncommon Good. May Jesus Christ, the Prince of Peace, reign in our hearts and our family, our city, our state, the entire globe, the solar system, galaxies, the whole kit and caboodle. This is The Uncommon Good, and we'll be back next week.
The Uncommon Good with Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr is heard every week on wonderful Catholic stations like this one, and anytime on podcast. Just search for The Uncommon Good.